me.
Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast,
The podcast for rehab clinicians that want to better serve older adults.
And now, your host, Dustin Jones.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast. I currently find myself in my friend's child's playroom. So if you hear some toys rattling and kids screaming, I'm going to go ahead and apologize. But we are going to continue with our series, The Ultimate Guide to Simplifying Your Documentation. So we have partnered with Kornetti and Krafft to try and give you some principles to help you make your documentation simple yet effective. Last week, we talked about the subjective portion of our documentation. I'd be sure to go back and listen to that episode, but it is not necessary to do that before you listen to today's episode. We're going to have a lot of helpful information because Kornetti and Krafft is going to dive into the objective portion of documentation that we often need to do, but often neglect. If you don't know Kornetti and Krafft, they are a healthcare solution business with over 70 years of clinical management and ownership experience. K&K is a healthcare consulting company with proven expertise in interdisciplinary, patient-centered care management to fortify your agency's fiscal security. With professional accountability, leadership, fiscal responsibility, integrity, evidence-based clinical practice strategies, and regulatory expertise, they are committed to an individualized customer experience. They build solutions that fit your needs. Their goal is to ensure therapy remains an integral component of the medical home model through an ever-changing healthcare paradigm. They accomplish this through education, consultation, and interfacing with regulatory bodies and payer sources to provide our clients mentoring, teaching, training, tools, and management resources. All that to say, they are awesome. So I hope you will, I know you will enjoy this episode. Be sure to stick around towards the end so you can find out how you can be a part of our special live Q&A webinar with Kornetti and Krafft. This is going to be on Wednesday, July 26th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and you will have open access to these brilliant women and ask them your questions, and they will do their best to give you answers. So without further ado, the objective portion of documentation.
Hi, I'm Cindy Krafft.
And I'm Dee Kornetti, and we're with Kornetti and Krafft, and here we are back again talking about documentation, Cindy. So what's on the agenda today?
Well, come on, there's never enough time in the day to talk about documentation because we love it so much. And we spent a considerable amount of time talking about getting information from the patient, but now we got to move it ahead to the objective discussion of getting information about the patient. And we know that this is, kind of gotten a little squirrely starting in 2011 when people read the regulations and Medicare kind of upped the ante with specifying this need to be objective, and somehow that got interpreted into Medicare now has mandatory tests and measures that therapists have to use in home care, or I have to make sure I have one on every evaluation. So as what I lovingly refer to as the queen of tests and measures that you are, Dee, can you speak to this issue kind of coming out of the gate with, are tests and measures mandatory for therapy in home health?
No, there's no mandated test or instrument that we're obligated to use. And please, folks, let's not ask CMS, who is not the therapist, who is not the discipline-specific expert, to start prescribing instruments. That's not a good plan for us. No mandatory tests are required.
So if they aren't mandatory, then why can't I, as you and I still see quite pervasive in the documentation, use phraseology like impaired balance, decreased range of motion, limited strength? Why can't I just do that then? I mean, if you're saying it's up to me as the professional here, why can't I use terminology like that?
Well, I think you can use terminology, but what exactly is impaired? I mean, there's two ways you can go with measurement. You can qualitatively measure or you can quantitatively measure, right? We have qualitative measurement. Like if you're doing gait assessment, you can do a qualitative gait analysis using maybe like Ranchos Los Amigos terms for the stages of swing and stance, right? Phases of gait. You can also quantitatively measure gait, like maybe a gait velocity measure or stride length or step width or anything, like that. And so the idea here is that when we get to these phrases that really we can't, there's no baseline established. We're just saying, hey, something's wrong, not normal, but we're not putting any parameters on it. And if that's how we're going to start, how can we gauge improvement or stabilization for people if we don't have a very clear established baseline, whether it's qualitative or quantitative? And so we need to get to some sort of documentation using the existing mechanisms and instruments and methodologies that we have and we're trained in. And our professional organizations, have spent a lot of time and dime making sure that we're competent in before ever allowing us to sit and get a license.
Well, but one of the most common measures we see and is the gait distance issue. What are your thoughts on the fact that always seems to end in 0 or 5?
Okay, so maybe I need to go a little bit further into this. All right, if we're going to measure, then actually measure. If you're measuring distance, then put time on it and take a measurement of distance. These estimates are not good. If you're going to do range of motion, don't estimate degrees. I think when we see everything ending in a 5 or a 0, that's basically code for we eyeballed it. And unless you have a Steve Austin, $6 million man. Now there's taking you way back in time, huh, Cindy? Uh-huh. You have that kind of eyeball where it's built in as they rebuilt you and made you stronger. I can jump buildings. I can run faster than a speeding bullet and all this stuff, right? These Superman-esque qualities, then you've got to use the instrumentation. Pull out the goniometer, because this idea that we're going to eyeball it and we're going to give generalizations is not good. Same thing can be said for min, mod, max. I mean, these are viable terms. What min assist is, what mod assist is, what max assist is, what verbal cues are, what supervision is. We understand that terminology. It's the language, of our skill set. However, the problem is, when you say something like patient needs verbal cues for bathing, then what comes to mind for me as a therapist, as a PT, a lowly PT that's not an OT, I sit here and say, I can fix that. I'll give them verbal cues. I walk in the house and say, go take a bath. That was verbal cues. If they go in, well, that's not what I meant. Well, what did you mean? So it's not just what assistance, but what do they need that assistance for? Do they need that to safely, enter and exit, the bathroom, the shower? Do they need that for sequencing? Do they need that so they use their washcloth as a washcloth and not try to brush their teeth with it? Do they need it for safety? Do they need it for instruction in DME? Do they need it because they run out of steam and they need to use energy conservation? What exactly are you verbal cueing for? And so when we're using those kind of qualitative statements, we need to tie it to specifics of why they need it or for what part of the transfer or what part of the bathing, okay? And what we lend to it and why it takes us. Why it can't just be grandson Johnny or the aide Betty Sue that comes in and stands there with them. Why does it take our skills to do it? If we're going to actually get to numbers and quantify impairment, Cindy, then let's use the instrumentation, the measures, the tests that we have as a discipline, as a profession, and pull from them like a plumber would pull wrenches from a toolbox, right? You call the plumber to your house, think about it, and you have a major problem with your plumbing. It's not just, I have a toilet that's backed up, but you got something in your septic system, you've got something here, it's backing up into your kitchen, your dishwasher's throwing dirty laundry water in there, something's askew. You bring a plumber in, you bring an expert in, and you want that plumber to get to the root of it. And if it was just take a wrench and turn a bolt or change an elbow in the plumbing line, then you're thinking, well, maybe I can go to Home Depot, and do it myself, right? And get a little education and figure it out. You expect it to take a couple different tools and a different skill set. So if the plumber comes in and with all these massive problems, he rips out one wrench from his back pocket and says, I got you covered. everything you need I got in my one magic wrench, aren't you going to scratch your head? You're going to scratch your head and say, geez, if it's that easy, is it really a skill? Why can't I figure it out? And how can one wrench fix every possible problem I have going on? Well, the same can be said of our discipline. This idea that we only use specific tests and measures, A, because we're comfortable with them or they're the only ones we know, it just really isn't acceptable, Cindy.
Well, one of the things I've noticed, Dee, though, is we can talk a lot about the need for more tools, and I love your analogy of the plumber and his one magic wrench causing his skill set into question. But I would say of the three therapy disciplines, speech tends to have the strongest reputation for tests and measures. I mean, they have so many of them that I swear sometimes, trying to read a speech evaluation can give you a cognitive deficit, trying to decipher all that's in there. But what I've noticed of late when they move them to electronic medical records, some of that stuff isn't there. So now I'm seeing things like speech eval saying impaired cognition, limited communication. I use this as an example because sometimes what you and I hear is I use the tests I use, or I don't use any of them because they are either not in my electronic medical record, or my electronic medical record allows me to put or has me put range of motion and percentages. What are your thoughts about that link to, well, my EMR made me do it?
Okay, so I'm going to give you my best pirate. I don't know what else to say. Honestly, it's not up to the EMR. The best documentation system we have is between our ears. And to blame it on the EMR, my dad used to have a saying. I'd say, Dad, well, my friend's parents let him do this, and my friend's parents let him do that. My dad would look at me and he'd say, Diana, if your friend's parents told him to go jump off a cliff, would you follow them? Would you want to do that too? And, it's just about sense. Listen, we know that there is a variety of tests and measures, okay? You test different components of impairment or different areas of impairment using different types of instrumentation, right? You've got muscle strength, aerobic capacity, balance, cognition, range of motion, gait. You've got all kinds of things that we can test, right? And so why are we relying on one or two measures that may or may not be included in our EMR? Because it's difficult? That's not acceptable. We have a responsibility to practice to the highest level of our license. And so if all we have in our software is the Kornetti and Tug, and they are very good measures, but let's be honest, folks, the Kornetti and Tug are not a quantifiable gait assessment. All right, they're qualitative. Parts of the Kornetti is. They're mobility impairment measures, but they're not strength measures. They're just not. And so to say that we can analogize endurance from there and range of motion and all these other things, it's just a fallacy. There's an entire list of available and appropriate tests and measures that is readily available at your fingertips. And there's various places to get them, Cindy.
Well, you brought me to the point I want to bring it home to, Dee, which is, okay, so yeah, I should have more than my magic wrench, but I'm dealing with an EMR that doesn't give me a lot of choices, and I'm just going to, take on the role of just being the honest person here and saying, and I don't know what my other test and measure options are. Where would you direct me that I could find the best possible options to start expanding that toolkit?
Well, if you're going to look to CMS for anything, look to the regs for this. They say we expect the professional to understand when their skills are needed and to resource their professional organizations. So that's ASHA, AOTA, and APTA. And if you look at the third guide, the Guide to Physical Therapy Practice, third edition, you're going to find different areas of impairment that we assess, and you can find associated appropriate population-specific tests and measures. Obviously, we don't want PEDS tests, right? So that's one resource. Specifically, if you're a member or not of your professional organization, even the home health section, we have a toolbox of appropriate tests and measures that can be administered validly and reliably in the home setting. You can also go to rehabmeasures.org. You can go to the NIH, National Institute of Health. They have lists, and they also include the appropriate populations and psychometric properties Because it's not just enough to run a test, right, Cindy? I mean, you got to know how to run it right so you can interpret the findings to be meaningful and reproducible. And then you have to know what those test values mean. And that goes into a whole other part of our documentation. So maybe I just need to cut off here without starting that riff. But honestly, I mean, there's great resources. And so I say expand your knowledge. You know, here's the one aside, the little caveat I'm going to give you right now. I graduated in 1985. Catherine Berg did her dissertation on the Berg balance test 4 years after I graduated in 1989. All right. The fact that we are still talking about, I don't know that test. I didn't get those kind of things in school. I have a responsibility in maintaining my licensure to keep myself updated and current with practice. Okay? So it's important that we all do that and we look into those resources and we use them responsibly, appropriately, where they're indicated for our patient population in the home health setting.
Well, folks, you have heard it from the queen of tests and measures, and hopefully the passion in your voice has gotten you motivated to stop making this Medicare is making me use something with a name and get our head engaged in this process to say I need to have a variety of tools, and I don't use the same one on every patient, and I know why I chose this one and how to administer it. And Dee, you touched on what's going to be our next conversation about assessment. Is it, you know, I can't just collect information. Now I got to get my brain engaged and interpret it and really connect the dots for folks. So I appreciate your passion, and I hope it's motivated our listeners to get back into that toolbox, dust off the ones they haven't used in a while, and maybe expand that set a little bit.
Right on, Cindy Krafft. All right, we'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.
There you have it, folks. Cindy and Dee, once again, bringing the goods, as always. I do want to take the time, though, to acknowledge Sherry Teague. She is an ampersand in Kornetti and Krafft, and she kind of is the motor oil to the engine, if you will. She does awesome work, and I know Cindy and Dee are very grateful for her work as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and just say a big thank you to Sherry as well for allowing Kornetti and Krafft Healthcare Solutions to just produce the awesome content that they regularly do. So I hope you all enjoyed that bit on the objective portion of documentation. We'll have next week's episode releasing probably on Monday, but I did want to mention how you can be a part of the live Q&A webinar taking place once again on July 26th. That's a Wednesday, 2017 at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So to sign up for that, you have to go to seniorrehabproject.com/live. There will be a link in the show notes, but just go in there, you submit your email address, and then we'll be emailing you later on with an invite to the webinar, and we'll have some fun on July 26th. So be sure to do that. It's filling up super quick. So it's going to be a pretty packed room. So I would go ahead and get your name on that list so you can make sure and get a question submitted for that time. So thank you all for listening, and I will talk with you next week. Thanks.